Welcome to Automating Deployments with Windows System Image Manager. In this lesson, I'm going to start out by telling you what Windows System Image Manager, or WSIM, is. I'll introduce you to why you want to learn it and all the other tools that use it as well. And before I can really explain how cool WSIM is, I want to walk through a manual installation of Windows 7, or rather the screenshots of a manual installation, so you'll understand why I'm putting the information in the answer file that I'm going to put in there. Then we'll meet Windows System Image Manager and get our first look at this tool. I'll explain what catalog files are and how you can create them and use them, and what happens if you don't have access to one. Then we'll create an answer file. I'll explain what configuration stages are and why you should learn WSIM in the first place. Windows System Image Manager, or WSIM, allows you to create answer files. Well, answer files are nice for a few reasons, because it allows you to create consistent installations. Now, if every single desktop in your environment is installed with the same script, of course, different unique information like computer name, that really helps your help desk when someone calls in with a problem. They know exactly how that machine was originally installed. In the past, we had unattend text and WinNT from the good old Windows XP days. Now, Windows 7's AutoUnattend.xml is the equivalent to XP's unattend.txt and WinNT.sif. And if you remember the good old Setup Manager from Windows XP, it was a nice friendly wizard that asked you just a few questions, and then you had to go in and hack all those INI files after it was done because it didn't ask you all the questions that it actually needed to. You'll learn why Windows 7's WSIM is the new Setup Manager, and really it's more like the new Setup Manager on steroids. It does a lot more than Setup Manager ever even dreamed possible. Steps for automating your deployment? Well, first of all, we'll need to open a catalog file. I'll show you how to create a catalog file, or just how to open one. Once you have a catalog file, we can create an answer file that will answer all the questions that setup.exe asks during an installation. Then you'll add a component and its settings to your answer file, configure the properties of each component that you'd like to add, validate the answer file. The cool thing about validating is it goes in and checks, is there any blatant errors that are going to blow up this answer file? And it warns you, or at least lets you become aware of them. Then you can save that answer file, run setup.exe, and you've automated your deployment. Let's look at manually installing Windows 7 first. Step 1 is Setup Launches. You need to choose the language you'd like to perform your installation in. Then, choose to begin the installation. Accept the End User License Agreement. Choose the type of installation, either an upgrade or a custom installation. Remember, upgrading can only be done from other versions of Windows 7 or Vista. You cannot do an upgrade from XP to Windows 7. That's called a migration. Another option you have here is a custom installation. If you've ever heard of performing a parallel installation, possibly there's a problem with the machine that won't boot to its existing operating system, so you can install another version of the operating system in a different folder and make that a parallel installation so you can at least access files and folders from the new OS you've installed. You could do that with a custom installation. Next, set up your disk partitions. Where are you going to install the operating system to? Then you should see the Installing Windows. And this is where you're going to see it copying the files, expanding the files needed. It'll install the features and updates, and then complete the installation process. Once you restart that machine, you'll be introduced to the SysPrep Mini Setup Wizard. And anyone who's purchased a new machine from an OEM, other equipment manufacturer, has walked through this before. The first thing you'll need to do is type in a username for the new local administrator account of that machine and a computer name. Choose what the local admin password is going to be and give it a hint. Input your product key and select to automatically activate Windows when I'm online. If you're creating a test machine and you don't want to put a product key in, then you also want to remove the check mark from the box, automatically activate Windows when I'm online, because that requires a product key. Choose what your automatic update settings are going to be. Use the recommended settings. Well, that means download and install as soon as they're available. Install important updates only. Well, those are just your critical updates. Or ask me later. That just turns off automatic updates, and it will ask you again later. Set your time zone, current date and time, and your network location. As you can see, we have 3 different locations. If you're at home, choose the home network. If you're at work and you have firewalls up, choose work network. If you're having a cup of coffee out at one of the local coffee houses, you would want to choose public network. So this is what an installation in a nutshell would look like. And I wanted to bottom line it for you here. So you saw that number 1, what we did is we had to tell it the language, end user license agreement, the type of installation we're performing, the disk partitioning scheme we wanted, and then we see the installing windows. Bottom lining the SysPrep Mini Setup Wizard, username, computer name, password of that local admin account, give it a product key, choose whether you want to activate or not, set up your automatic updates, time zone, and your network location. So if those are the questions that your installation is going to ask and SysPrep's Mini Setup Wizard is going to ask, we want to provide answers to all of those questions so nobody has to type them in. That's where you're going to meet the tool we'll use. First, you have to install the Windows Automated Installation Kit, or WAIK. We're using WAIK version 2.0. Then, once you have it installed, you can click Start, choose Microsoft Windows AIK, and then within that program group, you'll find Windows System Image Manager. And the WAIK is supported to be installed on Vista, SP1, and later operating systems, including server operating systems. For your first look at WSIM, let's start in the top left corner under Select a Distribution Share. This is your distribution share pane where all of your deployment files and folders will be stored. Then, if we move on over to the middle, we have the answer file pane. This is where our answer file will be when we create a new one. To the right of that is the properties pane, where we'll configure all the properties of our answer file. And at the bottom is the message pane. The message pane is where we'll get information about validating this answer file to make sure it's going to work before we actually try it out. The one pane I've left till the end is the Windows image pane, because that's where I always begin. To start a WSIM script, I right-click, select a Windows image or catalog file, and then choose my install.wim or whatever WIM file I'd like to create an answer file for. In this scenario, I've chosen to create an answer file from an install.wim that contains Windows 7, Home Basic, Home Premium, Professional, and Ultimate. The first thing WSIM will ask is, okay, I see that there's 4 different OSs I could create an answer file for. Which one do you want this answer file to be associated to? As I'm sure you can imagine, there are different settings that you can configure in Ultimate versus Home Basic. So you need to create an answer file for the edition of Windows 7 that you're going to be deploying. Choose your edition and click OK. If this is the first time you've created an answer file for this WIM file, chances are you don't have a catalog file built yet. Now, a catalog file is simply a little teeny tiny baby file that contains all of the components or settings that you can put into an answer file and configure. If you don't open a catalog file, when you attempt to open a WIM file, WSIM will ask you if it should create a catalog file to go alongside that WIM file. The answer is yes. You have to have a catalog file. So if you ever get this informational message, choose yes to allow WSIM to create a catalog file of all the components you can add to your answer file. To dive in a little bit deeper on what a catalog is, this usually is about 5 megs in size. And the catalog file simply contains a list of all the settings and the properties of those settings that you can add and configure in an answer file. Catalogs always have an extension of .clg and need to be stored in the same directory as the WIM file you opened. We have our catalog file in the bottom left corner, as you can see. And the catalog file doesn't look too daunting. Looks like we have some components and packages that we can expand. It's going to get a little bit more interesting when we expand that components folder. You'll also notice that I have an answer file. I've told it create a new answer file. There's nothing in it, which is why there's no plus signs next to any of the folders you're looking at there. Before we dive into this, I want to blow up the answer file portion for just a minute and talk a little bit more about what we're looking at here. In the answer file, we're looking at the different stages that a Windows installation goes through. Windows 7 installations are performed in stages. The stages have a special name. They're called configuration passes. Now, it looks as though we have 7 different stages that an installation would go through. Well, that's true. We do have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, as you can see in the answer file, but not all of those stages must be run. In the first stage, the Windows PE stage, well, that's where you begin the installation, tell it the language that you'd like to perform it in, and set up your disk partitioning. Offline servicing, that configuration pass allows us to patch our WIM files or images offline. That's what it's referring to as offline servicing. The generalize, this is the pass that stores information for our sysprep generalize settings. Pass 4 is the specialized pass, and you're going to see that we always use pass 4. Pass 5 and 6, those are interesting. Audit system and audit user. Most of the tools in the WAIK were built for OEMs years and years and years ago, and they've been using these for a long period of time before they were ever publicly available. Audit system and audit user configuration passes allow you to set up a machine so you could boot back into it one time after you have the installation completed, all your drivers installed. Lets you check and make sure everything's working properly. The next time someone restarts that machine, then they'll get the sysprep mini setup wizard like we do when we go buy a brand new computer. So audit system and audit user most of the time are still utilized just by OEMs. The 7th configuration pass is the UBI, the out-of-box experience configuration pass. And as you're going to see very, very soon, there are a lot of settings that we can put in either pass 4 or pass 7. And I'm going to be talking more and more about that as we get into this. The passes that are always used in every installation is Windows PE, pass 1, Specialize, pass 4, and UBI, pass 7. If you choose to add a component to one of the configuration passes, what happens if it would allow you to add that one setting to all 7 configuration passes? You're going to find out very quickly that some settings can only be added to one specific configuration pass. Well, those are the easy ones. You don't have to worry about that. But the ones that allow you to add that component or the setting to all 7 passes, well, now how do you know which one to add it to? I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but testing is the only way you're going to figure it out. The documentation is not fantastic here. The example I like to use is the product key. Now you can put the product key in 2 different passes, either the Windows PE, pass 1, or Specialize, pass 4. If you choose to put the product key in pass 4, Specialize, then it's used to activate the product and not for the actual product key. Therefore, during the installation, you will be prompted to input a product key. If, however, you put that product key in the Windows PE configuration pass, then you won't be prompted during the installation because it's used as the product key and activation of the product as well. To add a component, notice the bottom left pane in the Windows image pane. We have the components expanded, and there are a number of these, which I'm going to show you on the demo. To add a component to your answer file, you would right-click and then choose Add Setting To, and then one of the passes will be black and selectable, sometimes all of them, but as you can see, the specific one we've chosen here can only be added to pass 1. It's the only one that's black and selectable. So we would choose Add Setting to Pass 1, the Windows PE. Once the setting has been added to the answer file, then we can highlight that component or setting, and then in the Properties pane, you can configure the actual property fields for that one specific component or setting. And there are a couple of notes here for you. Sometimes adding a component that has subcomponents beneath it adds the component you've asked for along with every single subcomponent. But sometimes you'll have to drill all the way down to the subcomponent and add it because adding a parent object won't automatically bring in the child objects. You also have some interesting drop-down boxes, and I like these. I like the ones that ask, when do you want me to show the user interface during the installation process? On error is my favorite, but you can set it up to prompt people for certain pieces of information during the installation. And the cool thing about your new XML answer files is you can prompt it for one piece of information. Someone can sit down, let's say they type in the product key, click Next, and it goes right back to the answer file. In the past, if anything was ever displayed to the screen, well, your answer file was dead in the water. So now you can tell it, when do you want to show the user interface during installation? You can pick and choose each component you add, show it if there's an error, never show it, regardless of an error or not, or always show it. Like I said, on error is my favorite. If you have an existing operating system on a machine, it's a good idea to wipe that machine clean before you add a new OS to it. And the component that's going to do that is going to be your disk configuration. Will wipe disk set to true. You could also choose to set this to false, but I'll show you when we get into the demo. If you choose a setting from a drop-down box, it's a little bit more difficult than you would imagine to get it completely cleared again. And I'll show you how to revert it to previous changes, well, like I said, once we get into the demo. Passwords in the answer file. This is really important. Think about things you'll do during an installation. You might have a machine join a domain. The credentials that you give that answer file to allow a machine to be joined to the domain, they don't have to be domain administrator permissions or privileges, right? So you want to make sure that you go with the least privilege model, and the account you input and its password are only capable of joining that computer to the domain. And here's the reason why. That password is going to be displayed in clear text, and there's nothing you can do about it. There's only one password that will be obfuscated, and that password is the password of the local administrator account that will be created on that machine at the end of the installation. Now, obfuscation is not encryption. I want to make sure you completely understand that no passwords will be encrypted whatsoever in your answer file, but I will show you what obfuscated passwords look like. When you have added your components to your answer file, configured the properties of each of those components, it's a good idea to validate your answer file. This is something that the WSIM tool can do by itself. It will look at the settings that you've configured, and it can tell if you've just blatantly left something blank that installation requires, or it checks for settings that you might have typed in that don't match any of the valid entries for the image. So you would get an error message in the Messages pane of WSIM. What's cool about that is you can add a whole bunch of components to your answer file and configure a whole lot of properties in the components of your answer file. When you validate and get a list of messages in the validation pane, if you double-click on that message, it'll take you directly to that property of the component in the answer file, so you don't have to remember where it was that you put it. Did I put it in pass 1, 4, or 7? Who knows? After you've added 20 or 30 settings and you haven't looked at this in a while, it can get to be a little confusing as to where you put things. So validation, critical. when you're using WSIM. This is what validation would look like. So you notice here, I've blown up the messages pane of WSIM. And I have two messages. I have a red circle with a white X in it, which means that's really, really bad, and I have to fix that or my answer file is not going to work. And that's telling me the key disk ID of my disk must have a value. It tells me the location, so I could go back up and cruise through the answer file and find it, or I could simply double click on this line and it'll pop me right into that property so I can give my disk ID a value. The second type of message I have is a warning. Setting skip machine out of box experience is deprecated. Oh, well, if it's deprecated, that means it's no longer used in this Windows image. So go ahead and remove it. You wouldn't want to store a lot of empty properties in an answer file. It would just become bloated and really difficult to maneuver around. Once you have all of your messages satisfied, everything's looking good, then your messages pane should look like the one on the bottom. No warnings or errors. The architecture of your answer file is critical to the WIM file of your operating system. 32-bit WSIM scripts, well, they can only deploy 32-bit operating systems. And 64-bit WSIM scripts can only deploy 64-bit operating systems. If you have a 32-bit WSIM script you've created, and you accidentally plop in the 64-bit Windows 7 DVD and attempt to use that answer file with that DVD, it will just ignore it, and it will manually show you each step of the installation because that answer file doesn't belong to that architecture. So nothing horrible is going to happen, but it would be a little confusing as to, I've got the answer file, I've named it what it needs to be named, I've put it where I need to put it, and it's ignoring it during installation. Well, you've got to match the architecture to the actual OS. Once you've validated, you know you're using the right architecture, save the answer file. Now, what you name it and where you put it is going to depend a lot on how you're going to use that answer file. If you're going to perform a manual installation where you do have the Windows 7 DVD you're going to put in the DVD tray, then you need to name your answer file autounattend.xml, and it needs to be in the root of any removable media. That could be another CD or a UFD, which is a USB flash device, as long as your machine can read UFDs during the boot process. So on some older machines, CD might be the only way to go. Earlier, I walked you through a manual installation. So this information should look familiar to you now. I wanted to bottom line what's asked during the installation process and now show you which pass that information belongs in. And it makes sense when you really think about it. So pass number 1, the Windows PE pre-installation environment pass. Things you should know before you begin the installation. Well, what language would you like to perform the installation in? You have to accept the end user license agreement. And are you going to do a custom or an upgrade installation? How many disks do you have? How many partitions do you want to put on each one of those disks? And what size should they be? And then choose to install Windows. It wouldn't make any sense to format your drives or partitions in configuration pass 7 and wipe out your entire installation. So a lot of these make sense as to why you have to put them in the Windows PE pass. Then, when it comes to the SysPrep Mini Setup Wizard, everything else can be in pass 4 or pass 7. And I'm going to walk through in the demo and show you how to configure your answer file. And you'll see how we put some of these settings in pass 4 and some go to pass 7. Those settings, just to refresh your memory, what's the username of the local administrator account that's going to get created? What's the computer name? Password of that local administrator account? Product key, whether you want to activate or not? How you want to configure your automatic updates? The time zone? And network location. Let's go see how to create a WSIM script. On my deployment server, I've already installed the Windows Automated Installation Kit, or WAIK version 2.0. To start WSIM, I'll click Start, All Programs, Expand Microsoft Windows AIK, and choose Windows System Image Manager. Now I'll expand this. And first step is to right-click, select a Windows image or catalog file, or if you would like to go through the menuing structure up top, you can do that as well. I just find it a little quicker and easier to right-click and tell it to select a Windows image. In my WIMs folder, I have an install.wim and a Windows 7 Ultimate CLG file that I copied over from my Windows 7 DVD. You'll find both of those files in your sources folder of that DVD. I'm going to choose to open the catalog file. And as you can see, I simply have components and packages. 2 folders listed, nothing scary yet. For the answer file, I want to create a brand new answer file. And as you can see, each of the 7 configuration passes are listed by default. Let's expand components. And I'm going to readjust these windows a little tiny bit so we can read them better. And the first point I'd like to make is the first 3 labels on almost every single component is the same. x86 _ Microsoft - Windows. Look at that. They're almost every single one of these components are the same. So you need to pay attention to the component name, and of course they're all going to be incredibly long. So I'm going to scroll back up to the top here. And the first component I want to add is the International Core WinPE. I'm not going to waste time on constantly saying x86 _ Microsoft - Windows. I'm just going to cut right to the chase and tell you the name of this component that makes it more specific is International Core WinPE. Now those are in alphabetical order, so if I go down, oh, there's an International Core, but right beneath it is International Core WinPE, and that's the one I want. So the second point, make sure you grab the right component, otherwise you won't find the property fields that you need to configure in your answer file. So we'll add this component. I'll right-click and choose Add Setting to Pass 1. That's easy. Nothing else is even selectable. So we've added this component to the answer file. With it highlighted, we can now go over to the Properties pane and tell it the language. I'm going to choose English US. In fact, I know I have to type this in 5 times, so I'm going to right-click and tell it to copy. I want the input locale to be in English, the system locale to be in English, the user interface language, that'll be English too, and the user locale. If I expand that component, you'll see the setup user interface language is there also. I have to tell that. Do that in English as well. And then you have the option to Will Show User Interface, and it's a drop-down box. If you position your cursor in that field, you'll see that you can click on the down arrow, and you have your options here. On error, never, and always. I'm going to go ahead and accept the default of on error. So our first component is added to the answer file. The next component is going to be listed under Setup, but not just Setup. Let's go on down. Let me show you. Here's Setup 6.1. If I expand that, and the 6.1 is the version number of WSIM, so don't worry about that. It'd be nice if they hid that information and the x86 _ Microsoft - Windows. It'd sure make this a lot easier to read. But until they do, we'll highlight Setup, and then I'm going to expand Setup, expand Disk Configuration, and highlight Disk, right-click, and Add Setting to Pass 1. The only one I can add it to. Now the machines I'm going to be deploying using this answer file, well, they're all Windows 7 desktop machines and they only have 1 drive. So that disk ID is going to be 0, and we'll wipe disk. If you have any existing operating systems and you'd like to wipe that disk clean, you can choose to set that to true. But after you've chosen something from one of these drop-down boxes, if you position your cursor in there and hit the backspace key, which I am now, you cannot get it out. In fact, I can double-click and it changes it from true to false to true to false, but it doesn't actually remove the entry altogether. If I've accidentally set something in the drop-down box and now I want to get it out for good, under the Settings, right-click and tell it to revert change. That will wipe it clean. Now this setting I actually need. I'm going to set it to true. And this is one of the interesting components. If I go over to my answer file and I expand disk, I see that I have create partitions and modify partitions, but I don't have any properties that I can actually fill out. When you chose disk, you didn't get all child objects. Watch. Back under my components, expand disk, expand create partitions, and then expand modify partition. You have to go all the way down to this child object in order to add that to your answer file. So I know I'm going to create a partition. I'll add that setting to pass 1, and I'm already here. I know I have to modify the partition too. I'll add that one while I'm here. Then, on our answer file. Now notice we've barely added anything, right? And the screen is starting to get a little bit messy. So I think it's a really good idea to clean up after yourself so it's less confusing in here. Now the first thing I want to tell it to do is to create a partition. Highlight Create Partition. Then in the Properties, I'm going to set Extend this partition equals true, which means look at disk 0 and create a partition that encompasses the entire hard drive space. So we're not going to give it a specific size. If you wanted to, you would go down and input the size under the size setting. I'm just going to tell it to extend and encompass one hard drive will be the entire partition that's created. The order, well, partitions get started with the number of 1, where disk drives are started with 0. So this one is going to be the first one, which will be 1. The type, you can choose from your drop-down. I'm going to choose primary. And a note of caution, if you choose to extend this partition to encompass the entire amount of hard drive space available, and you give it a size, well, you'll blow up your answer file. It's one or the other. You don't give it both. And if you wanted to create a typical Windows 7 100 meg primary partition up front, you could do 2 create partitions. I'm not going to. So this answer file will create 1 partition on that hard drive and install Windows on that partition, which is a little different than your default settings from setup.exe. So I've got my create partition information set. Next, I'll highlight modify partition, and I need to set that partition to be active first. I'll choose true to set it to be active. Format it. We'll go with NTFS. If you wanted to input a label, you could. The drive letter, I think somebody got a little bit list happy here because I could have typed in a C, but nope, you have to choose it from a drop-down list. The order, this is for partition number 1, whose partition ID is number 1, and we don't need a type ID. I'll close up that portion of my answer file and come back over to my list of components, close that up a bit. I'm still going to add something from setup though, so I'm not going to close setup. But this time we're going to drill down to Image Install, OS Image, Install to. Right-click, add setting to pass 1, and I want to install Windows on disk 0, partition 1. We'll close that in the answer file. And still within setup, I'll go down to User Data. We'll right-click, add setting to pass 1. Accept End User License Agreement. We'll set that to true. Full name. That'll be Rhonda Layfield. And organization name could be Green Lizard Books. If we expand User Data, we'll see that we have to input a product key. The product key would go right here, and it would be in this format. So replace this information with whatever product key you have at your disposal. And I like to make sure if there's something wrong with that product key, that I see the user interface when an error happens. Then we'll close User Data. And now under Components, I'm going to close Setup. The next component we're going to add is Shell Setup. So if we go down, here's shell setup. I can right click. Oh, and this one gets a little bit more interesting. I can add this one to pass 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. Well, because of a lot of testing, I know I'm going to add it to pass 4. And with that highlighted in the answer file, I will give this new machine a computer name of GLB VP for a vice president. Under time zone, I'm going to type in Eastern Standard Time. Now notice there are a lot of property fields that are blank. And you know what? That's okay. They don't have to be filled in. But I wouldn't want those properties to be saved in my answer file, creating this big bloated answer file that doesn't do a lot, but confuse me. So you'll see what happens to these settings when I validate at the end. Next, I'm going to go back to the components. We'll expand shell setup, and we'll go down to user accounts. Within that, I'll expand local accounts and choose the local account. This is the local administrator account that's going to be created on my brand new Windows 7 machine. I can right click and choose to add that to pass 7. Description, I'll just say is the admin account. The display name, that'll be Rhonda. The group I'm going to add it to is the administrators group, and the name will be Rhonda. If you expand that, highlight password, in the value you can type in whatever you want that password to be. Now I had told you that this password would be obfuscated. We're going to come back to that in just a minute. Let's finish building our answer file. First, I'm going to do a little cleanup, close these guys, and we only have a couple more settings to add. Under Shell Setup, UBI, I'll right-click and choose to add that to pass 7, out-of-box experience. Under UBI, I want to hide the end user license page, set that to true. Under network location, we can select work because these all will be work machines. Under protect your PC, well, there's no drop-down box. What do I say? Yes? No? The help file comes in really handy here. If you position your cursor in one of the properties fields and tap F1, you'll open the help file and it will go directly to that setting. So this is telling us we're on protect your PC. And the values that I can input are either a 1, 2, or 3. Okay, if I put in a 1, well, that's going to specify the recommended level of protection for your computer. Wonder what that is. Yeah, really doesn't tell us, does it? You gotta love this. 1 is telling it, as soon as an update comes out, I want it downloaded, I want it installed. This machine must always be patched. If you input 2, well, that's going to do critical updates only. If you do 3, that's where you're telling it, turn off automatic updates for right now. I'll deal with it later. We'll close this help file. And I, of course, am going to input a 1 because I want the recommended settings. Then, under Skip User Out-of-Box Experience, I'll set that to true. We'll close this guy up in the answer file. And one more component to add. I like to do this on all of my test machines. If I go back to the list of components, I'll close Shell Setup. I'm looking for Security Licensing SLC-UX. Okay, so if it's in alphabetical order, I'm going to go back up to the top. And if I come down, there's Security Licensing SLC. Well, that's not right. There's Security Licensing SLCC. That's not what I'm looking for either. There's Security Licensing SLC-UX. We'll right-click, add that setting to pass 4. With that highlighted, I can tell it to skip auto activation, set that to true. This is a test machine. I don't want it to activate against any of my product keys. Now, we've built an answer file. Let's validate. Click Tools and Validate Answer File. Notice, I'll move this over a bit. In our messages pane at the bottom, we now have some messages. And if you took the time to go through and looked at this, you'll find that the settings have not been modified. Therefore, it's not going to save an empty setting in my answer file, which is fine with me. When you first start using WSIM, you might want to take just a couple minutes to look at the settings that aren't going to be saved in your answer file, just in case you might have forgotten to configure one properly. If I cruise down, make sure everything looks good there. This is an old setting that's not even used anymore, so both of those are deprecated. No big red circles with the white X in the middle of them. So I'm going to now save my answer file. I'll close WSIM and tell it, yes, I would like to save that. And then I'm going to store mine in a folder called AF for Auto Unattend file. And I'm going to name this Auto Unattend.xml and click Save. Let's go look at that file. I'll open Windows Explorer, go to the C drive, AF folder, and we'll open that XML file. I'll expand that window so we can see the whole thing. And then just cruising through, what I'm looking for is that password. Now you guys all saw me type in Swordfish1, right? This is what it looks like when it's obfuscated. Here's the password tags. And I had chosen to not store it in plain text. Well, how do you do that? Let's close this. Close Windows Explorer. And I'm going to open WSIM one more time. I'm going to right-click on the answer file and tell it to open an existing answer file. And there's my AutoUnattend.xml. I'll expand past 7. There's my shell setup, user accounts, local account. There's the password. The reason that's obfuscated is because under the Tools menu, Hide Sensitive Data is turned on, which it is by default. But remember, the only password that will be obfuscated is the password for the local administrator account that will be created on that new Windows 7 machine. Our answer file looks great. It's time to test it. I'm going to close WSIM. And that answer file now that I've stored in the AF folder, that can be put on the root of any removable media. I'm using virtual machines, so the easiest way I know to do this is to create a new ISO file and then mount that as a CD to my new virtual machine. Well, to create the ISO, I'm going to click Start, All Programs, Microsoft Windows AIK, and open the Deployment Tools command prompt. I'll clean the screen a bit. And the tool I'm going to use is the Operating System CD Image Creator, or OSCD IMG, but this doesn't have to be bootable, and I'll show you why in a second. Now, what I want to do is I want to point my OSCD IMG utility that comes with the WAIK to that AF folder, and I'm going to tell it whatever you find in that folder, create an ISO image containing that data. It'll look like this. OSCD IMG. I'm going to allow for long file names inside that image. I want it to go look in the AF folder. Whatever it finds there, I want it to create an AF.ISO and store it in the same folder. Now this is really small, so it didn't take long. I can go back to Windows Explorer, and I now have my AF.ISO. I'll right-click that and choose Copy, minimize VMware, paste that to my desktop machine, go back to my virtual machines, but I need to create a new virtual machine. I'm just going to accept the defaults. And I need 2 CD drives. So I'm going to tell it to edit the virtual machine settings to add another CD drive. I'm just going to accept all the defaults, then click OK, and you'll see that I now have CD, DVD, tray, and here's the second one. The first one, I'm going to tell it to point to an ISO image file, and I've got my ISOs stored on my E drive in a folder named ISOs, so I'll select that, and then I need to choose one of the ISOs. There's the Windows 7 folder. Within that, I've got mine in the RTM, and I am going to use the 32-bit version. Remember, 32 is what we built that WSIM script using, all the x86. If we were creating a 64-bit script, you would have seen AMD 64 instead of x86. So the first DVD drive has to have my Windows 7 retail DVD or equivalent ISO. If you have an enterprise DVD, that's fine as well. The second one needs to point to, I can browse to my desktop and choose that af.iso that I've just created. Click OK and start that machine up. We'll maximize that. And the only screen you should see is the installing Windows screen. It'll sit here for a while. It'll perform a couple of reboots as well. And when the machine is finished, you'll have a brand new Windows 7 desktop installed, no questions asked, and a consistent installation every time. Now, WSIM might not look to be the friendliest of tools. And yes, there's a lot of testing involved when it comes to adding new components to WSIM and trying to figure out which component goes in which configuration pass. One last word to the wise on that. A normal Windows 7 installation should only take a couple of reboots. If you start adding components to your answer file, testing that answer file, and you've noticed your machine is rebooting 4, 5, 6 times now, try to put that component into a different configuration pass in the answer file. Because one thing that I have learned with WSIM is depending on where you put the components in the configuration passes sometimes will result in an additional reboot that's not really necessary. But one of the biggest reasons why you want to learn WSIM is not so much so that you can create your own manual scripts, but because all the other tools use WSIM scripts as well. Microsoft Deployment Toolkit 2010 Update 1, good old MDT, it uses WSIM scripts. So does Windows Deployment Service and System Center Configuration Manager. So take the time, learn how to create a WSIM script, because most of the other tools will create WSIM scripts for you, and if you need to edit it later, you better know what you're looking at and which pass you need to change. What we covered. It was just one topic, but it's a pretty big topic. I started with an introduction to WSIM, really more of a history lesson on what we had in the past compared to what we have now. Then I walked you through a manual installation of Windows 7, just so you see the types of questions that are asked during an installation and hopefully understand better why we answered the questions we did in our answer file. Then you met Windows System Image Manager. I showed you how to open a catalog file, and you now know what a catalog file is. We created an answer file for a 32-bit Windows 7 deployment. I explained the 7 different configuration stages and the fact that not all 7 are used for every single deployment. 1, 4, and 7 are always used, but there are other reasons why you would use the various other configuration passes. And I then wrapped it up with, okay, this is not the easiest tool to learn. Why should you learn it? Because all of the other tools use WSIM scripts. So you're not going to learn it just so you can manually create your own automated scripts, but so you can troubleshoot the WSIM scripts that the other tools create for you. I hope you've enjoyed your first look at WSIM, and I think you're ready to create your very first WSIM script and automate your deployments.